Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Stephen Carroll, and this is Here's Why, where we take one news story and explain it in just a few minutes with our experts here at Bloomberg.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state.
When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country.
And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have. One of the nastiest countries to deal with is Canada.
We have a right not to help them with their financial difficulties.
Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough to do business with, and we can't let them take advantage of the U.S.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that.
Of all the places the US president has lashed out at, he's reserved some of his strongest language for Canada. For months, Donald Trump has been lobbing tariff threats and insults at the country and its Prime Minister Mark Carney. The offensive from its nearest neighbour has pushed Canada, under Carney's leadership, to rethink its approach to trade and diplomacy.
Now, Canada can't solve all the world's problems, but we can show that another way is possible, that the arc of history isn't destined to be warped towards authoritarianism and exclusion. It can still bend towards progress and justice.
Here's why Canada is pushing an alternative to Trump's world. The host of Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, David Gura, joins us now for more. David, good to talk to you. First of all, can you put in context for us how much the relationship between the US and Canada has changed under Donald Trump?
It's radically different, and you visit with people along that northern border of the US who used to have kind of easy transit and friendships across that border, and those relationships have changed dramatically in the last few months. Eurasia Group, the kind of global political risk consultancy, noted that there's been this long-standing relationship between the US and Canada built on economic integration, security partnership. They've declared that over. And I think in the early months of President Trump's second term, there was this feeling that the breakdown in this relationship was perhaps irreparable, but since then, the president has not backed down. The rhetoric has continued. He's recently threatened to block the opening of this bridge that goes from Detroit to Windsor, Ontario, named for Gordie Howe, the Canadian hockey player who played for the Detroit Red Wings. And Canadians who've been outraged by President Trump's trade policies and the rhetoric that he's used have been watching as the U.S. captured Nicolas Maduro. They've heard the president's comments on Greenland. And maybe most significantly, Stephen, they've kind of seen the contours of what's come to be called the Don Road Doctrine, the president's designs on having more influence in the Western Hemisphere, come into starker relief. So the realism of all of that has really colored this relationship dramatically.
So how has Mark Carney, as Prime Minister, responded to this?
Forcefully and seriously. I remember hearing Mark Carney, when he was on the campaign trail, say over and over again that when he would hear President Trump talk about Canada becoming the 51st state in the United States of America, he didn't interpret that as a joke. He wasn't taking that as the president making a making a jab. He treated it very seriously. I remember Mark Carney telling our colleague Michelle Hussein that he didn't become the prime minister because of President Trump, but I think that his election and that rhetoric and those threats really did a lot to propel him to the premiership. Those threats on Canadian sovereignty in particular, I think, really resonated with a lot of Canadians. It has also shaped a lot of policy during Mark Carney's tenure as prime minister thus far, domestic policy, foreign policy as well. And in recent weeks, we've seen the prime minister take a number of trips. I think he's been in office less than a year, but he's been on the road almost 2 months of that. He was in China, where he brokered a new strategic partnership with that country. He was in Qatar after that. They committed to a new deal, those two nations. The first time a prime minister from Canada has been to Qatar. What Mark Carney has said is that Canada is engaging broadly, going on a lot of these trips, looking at its relationships anew, and it's no longer waiting for the world that it wants it to be. It's taking a very realistic take on sort of the way the world is today.
And is this a uniquely Canadian approach, or is it a model that other countries who find themselves in Donald Trump's crosshairs could follow as well?
I think that's still unclear. The prime minister has fashioned himself as kind of a spokesman for what he sees as a model, as you describe it. But there is some uniqueness, I think, to Canada's circumstances. Certainly geographically, it's right there next to the United States of America. Its proximity is important here. And I also think that the Prime Minister's background is unique as well. He is somebody who quite expertly, I think, over the last year has been able to draw from the experience that he has working with big multilateral institutions, working as a traditional policymaker at the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, take that and sort of apply that to this new world. So as he talks about the need for Canada to improve itself and change the way that it looks at the world, he has an intimate understanding of the way that nations have operated historically.
So in Davos, Mark Carney made a pitch for the so-called middle powers of the world to band together to save the liberal order, multilateral institutions and free trade. That's a pretty massive set of ambitions. Is it realistic?
This is a speech that continues to reverberate around the world. I think it'll continue to do so. And what the Prime Minister did in those remarks is he encouraged everyone in the world to wake up to the way that it's changed and is changing. He used a lot of real talk. He talked about a rupture in the world order. He also, interestingly, gave license to other middle powers like Canada to be proud or feel like they have agency in this new world, to recognize that both independently and together. And when we talk about middle powers, we're talking about countries like Brazil and India and Saudi Arabia, Australia, South Africa. I mentioned how Prime Minister Carney has visited China and Qatar. He is advocating for this new asymmetrical geometry, as he calls it. I've also seen that referred to as kind of fluid coalitions. And I think we'll have to see if what the Prime Minister has proposed, that being these middle powers working with other middle powers, is going to lead to something new, kind of new relationships among them. We're going to see them kind of building on what they've done before. There have been a number of economists and policymakers who have cautioned that maybe there's a limit to how much power they could have absent the kind of traditional multilateral institutions they've been a part of in the past. I think that it is realistic, but it is going to be difficult.
So Canada at the same time is preparing to renegotiate its trade treaty with the United States. We're hearing rumblings from the White House on this. Could the bold stance that Mark Carney has taken backfire?
So this is a huge concern, Stephen. The U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer has said that some of Mark Carney's comments have made renegotiating this deal more challenging. And Bloomberg has reported that President Trump is privately musing about exiting the USMCA. It has to be renegotiated by July the 1st of this year. What the U.S. has said officially is it's going to negotiate terms bilaterally with Mexico and Canada independently. We'll see what happens here. But I just want to remind everyone that this deal, it's an agreement that Donald Trump was party to. He signed this during his first term. So bottom line is Canada wants this deal extended. So does Mexico. And I should say, by the USMCA being in effect, Canada has kind of insulated itself from some of the more punitive tariffs that the president may have wanted to put in place.
What about the politics behind all of this in Canada as well? I mean, people are usually pretty pleased when they get describe it a Love Actually moment of a world leader standing up for their own country, particularly in the face of a superpower. Are Canadians, though, thinking realistically about what this could cost if the relationship goes sour?
I love your description of that. And you saw Mark Carney return from Davos to, if not a hero's welcome, at least a substantial bump in the public opinion polling in Canada. His approval is the highest it's been, I think, since he's been Prime Minister. But I think that he's aware of the fact that he doesn't have unlimited time here. Cost of living is still a huge issue in Canada. Food inflation remains very high. The cost and availability of housing is still a huge issue he has to deal with. And as the Prime Minister really speaks to the world about the way in which it's changed, he is certainly focused and has to focus on domestic economic circumstance in Canada itself. So there is that, which is going to be a huge challenge for him in the months ahead. And then also just this prospect of disentangling Canada and Canada's economy from the U.S. as he tries to forge these new relationships with other nations. This is not going to be something that's easy, Stephen.
Okay, David Gura, host of Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, thank you. For more explanations like this from our team of 3,000 journalists and analysts around the world, go to bloomberg.com/explainers. I'm Stephen Carroll. This is Here's Why. I'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.